Welcome to MediaMaker Spotlight from women in film and video in Washington, D.C. We bring you conversations with industry professionals for behind the screens, insight, and inspiration.
Thank you for joining us. If you're a new listener, welcome. And if you're a loyal listener of the show, you might be wondering why we now have a new name. Well, we're going to explain all of that because in this All Hosts special, we are spotlighting our rebrand and also chatting about some fun facts surrounding a variety of well-known film and TV recastings and some interesting renaming of titles. We're your hosts. I'm Candice Bloch.
I'm Sandra Abrams.
And I'm Tara Jabbari.
We're going to start off by giving some of our history about this renaming. While we're hoping the renaming has a positive impact for some shows or movies, changing the title or changing the lead doesn't always mean success. And so thank you for joining us. And you're going to learn not only our backstory, but a few more secrets about television, film, and other video projects.
Okay, so I guess just to kick it off, we were Media and Monuments. And as I understand, because I actually joined the podcast right after the name was decided, but before we launched our first episode. So Sandra and Tara, you guys are like the originals. You were there for the whole thing. And the name was decided, as I understand, because of paying homage to the fact that we Women in Film and Video is based in DC, right? So the Monuments was about
yes,
DC.
You're absolutely right, Candice. We were trying to think of the fact that we do have WIFV, WIF, and then it has the DC part of it, even though we have members from Virginia, West Virginia, Lower Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland. We had that focus of DC. And so we wanted to capitalize on the fact that we are in the nation's capital.
Is that a pun? Yeah, I like that. Capitalize. Yeah, so the thing was, though, Media and Monuments is great. It had the alliteration. But we found over time in recording that people kind of didn't realize that we were a show about media production. They kind of thought maybe we were about monuments in some way. And so it was finally time to rebrand, which I was excited about because
when you showed up, you were like, I don't like the name. And we're like, shut up. Because it took a long time.
But it's okay. I was a team player. We did it. And then we realized as more people were giving feedback, they if they didn't already know what we were, they had no way of knowing what we were. So it's a perfect time to rebrand to a name that better reflects what we do. And as hopefully you already know, because hopefully you've already listened to a bunch of our shows, we talk to different media makers in screen-based media, and we talk all about film, television, and video production.
And so also, it turned into not so much just in the DC, the DMV area and East Coast based. It was all over the world, which is really cool. So it made more sense that it didn't have to be that whole monuments and had to have that tie-in as well.
Yeah, no, that's a good point too. And honestly, much like WIF's membership, we have members all over the world as well. And a lot of that is, thanks to things like streaming services. And when the pandemic, people got more and more used to being able to do that. We've got a lot of in-person events, but we also have hybrid and virtual events. So people can move away, but still stay connected to this network, which is great. So while we try to focus on the Mid-Atlantic, which is where we are based, this service that we provide of, talking to different media makers and providing all this information and insight and advice on all these different topics of production is really relevant to anybody wherever you are if you like production. So so we don't need to be focused on DC, but that is our origin.
What I wanted to really say, and especially for you two and Steve Lack, our sound person, how you went about it, because you guys were out in California at the podcast conference and you talked to several people. So there was a whole process that went into it. And I liked how you guys went about it. So you spoke to some people, a consultant, we gathered up some names, we went to the board with different names and asking them. And so there was a really concerted effort as opposed to the first time around where there was like a few names. We sent out a survey and then that was it. So this time it was a really very professional process that everybody undertook. And we got a lot of input from a lot of different people.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to make sure if we're rebranding that we only do it the once. But that is a good point that you bring up, that we are a service of an organization. So it is, the board has input and influence and all of that. So it's not just one person deciding what a new name is. We have to, have a lot of people agree and decide what they want it to be. And we did votes, we had discussions, but you're right. We were out at the Podcast Movement Evolutions conference out in LA earlier this year, and it was a good opportunity. I've wanted to change the name for a while, so it was a good opportunity to kind of point out that if people don't know what the show is, we were asking them, hey, what do you think this show is about? And most people had no idea it had anything to do with production. They were like, I don't know, monuments or something about monuments. And they kept focusing on the monuments part. We're like, well, maybe we should remove that part, even though it has media in there. And keeping MediaMaker at the beginning is a little bit of like kind of honoring our roots a bit and having that still like that M, and then there's like an MM, and I don't know. But yeah.
Do you think they go through this much hoops? Or it seems like they do a lot of testing when it comes Hollywood, and they're renaming or recasting either a television show or a movie.
I'm sure they do a lot more.
It depends on their budget and their process. From what I've heard, I mean, I got to interview a podcast called What Went Wrong podcast, which talks about productions and all the things that went wrong, from high budget ones to like small budget ones. But like, sometimes they will have changed the name completely. And then if it's a low budget one, I think it was Point Break. They said the original title was the character. What was his name? The Keanu Reeves character's name, which is like something like Johnny. I don't know. But they were like, that's a terrible title. And they're like, yeah, it is a terrible title. But then finally, towards production, or maybe it was James Cameron, who was a producer, was like, no, that's a terrible title. Just call it Point Break. And that's how it happened. But then you have the long studies and stuff like that of why, or like even Star Wars and stuff.
Well, and sometimes when other things come out in a franchise or a series, things will change. I mean, you also have the issues with how like test audiences react to something. But some of we can get right into some of the most famous ones that have changed. I know Sandra did some research on some of the, more notable names that were one thing, and then the title of a film changed to another. And sometimes it's just like legal reasons, like a movie already exists that has that name, so they change it, or they realize it needs to be punchier, like Point Break, and things like, Snakes on a Plane wasn't called that originally. It was called like a flight name or something.
That was a great
stuff
one.
Like that, where we really realize. I know Pretty Woman was one, but anyway, Sandra, you have the list.
Pretty Woman was 3,000 because actually she had said that she was worth 3,000. So that's why they were naming that. But then they ended up changing it to Pretty Woman. And that title actually resonated.
$3,000.
Right.
Yeah.
But people didn't really understand what that was about. When you said Pretty Woman, though, then people resonated with that. So then they ended up going with that. I also saw there was another title, Atomic Blonde, with Charlize Theron, and that was originally called The Coldest City. And I thought, if it was called The Coldest City, then you really wouldn't know what that was about. But once you say Atomic Blonde, that resonates with people. And also, it shows how you're highlighting the star there. So I thought that having that name really made a difference for that movie.
Yeah, it just makes it more fun.
But it's about her, not about a city,
right?
Kind of thing.
I mean, and it's interesting because some of these films, if they did come out with the other name, but they were really popular, we would associate it with that, and it wouldn't necessarily feel like it had to be changed. But there's, I know one of them, a really famous one was in the Star Wars franchise. It was originally Revenge of the Jedi. And then right before they changed it to Return of the Jedi, because it was, less, revengey. I don't know. But there's interviews that you can find of Mark Hamill talking about it and saying the next one out is going to be Revenge of the Jedi. But it's like, nope, it ended up becoming Return of the Jedi.
Just making that slight twist, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I was actually surprised to learn that the prequels on the Star Wars franchise were already planned. I thought that happened after the original series. But the original one actually was called Episode 4, like Star Wars: A New Hope or whatever. And then in that same interview where he was saying, and then after these 3, then we'll do a prequel and you get to see Anakin beforehand. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize that was from the onset the plan, which makes me feel better about the prequels, I guess.
Yeah. But one of the things that they do sometimes with, they'll have the book title and then they keep the book title as the working script and then they'll move on and change it somehow. And then other times audiences will not realize that it's with a beloved book. So they originally started out with the Harry Potter, and they had the first one, Harry Potter, Sorcerer's Stone, and then they had changed it somehow, and people didn't realize that this was Harry Potter. So then they had to go back to the book titles. Yeah. So they decided to keep the book titles and the movie titles the same, so then people could associate those titles and know that these are the Harry Potter movies.
So it was different when they first were going to release the films.
Oh, interesting. It wasn't just what they do sometimes where when they're filming, they're keeping it a secret by using a different title, or it was actually going to be a different name.
They were changing, like one was the Philosopher's Stone, but it should be the Sorcerer's Stone, so that type of thing.
That kind of thing. Oh.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Okay. So slight variations. There's one that when we were talking about doing this because there's a lot in the sort of reshifting and recalibrating in that whole category. And we decided, to focus on a little bit of renaming and recasting because there's a lot of other things that could happen. And it's kind of fun to enhance our rebrand by talking about some other stuff. But one of the things that we kind of brought up as a famous renaming when we were thinking about it was Edge of Tomorrow.
The Tom Cruise.
That film that came out with Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt, where all of the posters said Live, Die, Repeat and all these things. And people weren't, and it was actually it was a completely different name too. But then people just weren't resonating with it. So I think that was one that actually like retroactively, you can find it and it sort of has like an official second name of Live, Die, Repeat. So it's Edge of Tomorrow, but if you search for Live, Die, Repeat, you find the same movie. So it's interesting. And then also there's, when things are in different countries, they have secondary titles and different titles. Another one that had to be adjusted after the fact, I think, was the Ghostbusters remake with all the women, because it couldn't be Ghostbusters because the original Ghostbusters was that. So I think it's called like Ghostbusters Answer the Call. And then the other ones in the original series now have like Afterlife and all these other ones, and Ghostbusters, like the second one and third one. So that's another interesting one.
And I also think it's interesting when the titles are changed for different countries because they will mean something different. But I just also remember when I was a kid, we were in Paris and the movie Cruel Intentions was out. But when you go to Paris, it was called Sexy Intentions because they're like, let's just get it. We know what it is.
And how old were you when you noticed this, Tara?
Yeah, we were like 9 or 10. I mean, we knew how to read. So we were like, all right, they don't
But that's funny because usually you hear stories about a different culture, making things a little more G-rated rather than
not in Europe,
more.
But like, I think there's some stuff like in Japan or something like that where they couldn't call. It was recent too.
Yeah, sometimes there's not like a direct literal translation. Other times it's for cultural reasons. And in movies when they have their different languages and their versions in other countries, sometimes they'll change quite a lot. Like I know in certain animated films, they'll change like certain symbols and characters. And also, I believe, this is maybe a fun segue into Marvel, in all of the the Captain America stuff, Steve Rogers has a list of things to catch up on when he comes into wakes up in modern times. So it's, I don't know, classics over the last few decades that he was frozen or whatever. And that list looks different in different countries.
That's right.
So when they do a shot of the list and he's like crossing things off, like, oh, I need to watch this movie or listen to this song or whatever, it's different in different countries, which is always fun.
I just wanted to do this fun fact. Apparently it was Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of Harley Quinn. So apparently that title could not fit on the movie marquees outside. And I guess when people were actually going to the movies. So the movie marquee people changed it to Harley Quinn, Birds of Prey. So that movie title became different because of what was happening on the marquees at the theaters.
That is, yeah. And if you just put Birds of Prey, but then you didn't know if it was Harley Quinn, you wanted to capitalize on that franchise.
Yeah.
That's clever. I like that.
That is funny. We actually have a character limit kind of thing that adjusts our episode titles for a similar reason, because we do have the video companion. For those of you who are watching us, hello, and for those of you who aren't, you can also see us on YouTube. But there's only so much. You can have kind of an unlimited, I think, relatively unlimited amount of length for your title for a podcast, but we try to keep it a certain size so that in our little intros and how it looks on the screen, it's not too wordy and changes things too much by like becoming a second line or things like that. So in our little spreadsheet where we hash out our episodes and plan and do all of that, we keep it a certain width, that column a width, so that if it fits within there, then we know it will fit in the future, like the video companion version. So sometimes, it's a size limitation that changes names. Were there any other notable name changes? Were there any like television name changes that we saw? In research?
One of the ones that I wanted to, Roseanne, because of an incident with the main character. So they ended up changing that title, the reboot that they did, to The Connors. There was another one, Valerie Harper had a show, and it was called Valerie, and then they ended up changing it to The Hogans. But I don't think that took up. Whereas I believe The Connors, the reboot of The Connors, is doing well in terms of viewership.
Is that still on?
I believe it is, yes.
Or at least it lasted a while.
Right, after that particular name change. But sometimes...
Yeah, I do remember hearing about that.
Sometimes, though, it really has to do with the lead characters. If something happens with the lead characters, and take, for instance, 2.5 Men, and Charlie Sheen had that situation where he was self-imploding, and then they brought in Ashton Kutcher. It didn't do as well because it really was about the chemistry between Charlie Sheen and the other characters. So that I don't think was as successful. And also, you really have to think about how is the audience going to take that? Because the audience is hooked on, well, I like that particular person as the lead character in something. So how is the audience going to take to that? And in television, it's just not a 2-hour movie. In television, you have 10 to 12 episodes.
Yeah, well, then there's also, sometimes it continues on. We'll get into some it's a great segue for recasting, but I do want to point out, because you mentioned Ashton Kutcher, another thing we could have talked about is how actors change their names as well. A lot of times they'll change because either there's another famous actor with that name, or they want something a little more interesting or a little bit easier to pronounce. And so, it's nice that people now are embracing their actual original names, but I know that Ashton's actual first name is Chris, and he went with Ashton for it to be more interesting.
Oh, I didn't know
and to
that.
stand out a little bit more. Yeah, so he's Chris Kutcher. But
isn't that Topher Grace too? His name is Christopher, and he's like, I want it.
That's true.
Well, Topher's the second half of his name.
And he was in the 70s show.
So I like that as a
and
nickname.
He was another one that I think he wasn't, I think, the original lead or something, or he wasn't the original when they did the pilot. I think that's what I read. So,
yeah, and that happens that there's some really quick changes. So speaking of that, I've actually recently rewatched some of the original Seinfeld episodes, and in the first few, Jerry Seinfeld's dad is played by somebody else. Yeah, and I was like, oh, you don't even remember that, and it's because it was only, I think, like 2 episodes.
Also, speaking of Seinfeld, it originally was called the Seinfeld Chronicles, and then it wasn't, and it also was a summer replacement. It wasn't even, the show that, that people thought was going to go anywhere. And they ended up calling it Seinfeld and dropping that. And also the same with These Friends of Mine ended up being the Ellen Show because that was on ABC. And at the same time, NBC was coming out with the show Friends. And they said, that's too close to, there's NBC has Friends, ABC has These Friends of Mine. It's too close. Then they turned around, they called that Ellen, and that ended up being a big hit for ABC.
I mean, there's a lot of shows with just like a one name title. I mean, it's nice to be, concise and iconic that way rather than a whole mouthful. Like you were talking about the Suicide Squad one. I know that there's really long titles. Like there's even that whole movie called The Englishman Who Went Up a Hill and Came Down a Mountain. Like that's the whole title of the film. It's a lot. It's wordy,
And did you see the film because of the title?
Better. I know I saw the film and it was really cute, but I don't know if it was because of the title. I don't even know this. But it's always a fun fact of like number of words in an official title, trivia kind of thing, because it's one of the long ones. But so we can talk about some of the recasting as well. We can perhaps pivot that way because there's a lot in film and there's a lot that's controversial and there's a lot that is recent. So I did kind of want to talk about some of those recastings. Oh, but before, one other really famous renaming that is very relevant right now is we are filming this, and this is not going to come out not too much later than when we're recording it, and so it might still be out in theaters, but Deadpool and Wolverine, which is out now.
Huge hit this weekend at the box office.
Yeah, exactly. So it's we're recording this during the opening weekend of that. And I'm seeing it tonight. Yay. It was originally called Deadpool and Friend.
Oh.
And then Ryan Reynolds has been saying in interviews, a few interviews, that, right at the last minute, like they'd already had some of their big posters and things being all shipped around everywhere, and test audiences hated that name, and they realized, why aren't we using the Wolverine name too?
Yeah, was it like so it became spoiler or something? Like they wanted it to be a...
No, they already knew. I mean, people already knew. They teased that out for a while, that Wolverine was going to be in it.
Because he was like in all it. Anyway. Yeah, I think it's sort of like, why hide it? Say it's Harry Potter, say it's Harley, say it's Wolverine. You're going to get the fan.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if that one was because like the Deadpool character in Wolverine, he's so sort of like snarky and competitive that it was probably like, and just, this is my friend. Like
I know
Ryan and Hugh are keeping up a lot of that attitude in all of their press, of being very much like their characters, or very Deadpool-esque. But that's also, I think, going to be the official first R-rated MCU film. And the MCU, here's a good segue, I guess, has a lot of really famous recastings. A couple big notable ones are, of course, the Hulk, who in the original one was Edward Norton and then became Mark Ruffalo. But technically that Edward Norton one is part of the whole MCU, that same universe and storyline. They just don't talk about it. And then also in Iron Man Rhodey was played by Terrence Howard at first, and then became Don Cheadle for everyone after that.
Oh, so I thought Terrence Howard had tried out for it and didn't get
he's
the
in
part.
the original Iron Man.
No, it was kind of controversial as well. Yeah, a lot of times they don't come back because of
contract.
Yeah, a lot of times they don't come back because of like contract negotiations and things like that.
All sorts of stuff.
Yeah, there was a big public dispute about all of that, and so they just
I didn't know
got
that.
recast.
Interesting.
Yeah. Another big MCU recasting that personally bugs me is Howard Stark. So Tony Stark's dad. He's played by Dominic Cooper in Captain America: The First Avenger and in Captain Carter. But then John Slattery is the dad in Iron Man 2, Ant-Man,
because he's got to be old.
War, Avengers Endgame. Well, the thing is, I don't care about the ages. They just, as actors, look so wildly different from one another. They're like different in almost every way you could be, other than the fact that they're like men with mustaches and dark hair. I don't know. So
that's a good point.
It always bothers me when stuff is pulled out.
Sense. That's true. Now that
and I think Dominic Cooper looks more like he could be the dad of
That's
Tony
very
Stark.
good point. I never really thought about it.
Yeah, but I mean, there were other recastings in Marvel that are either smaller roles, like one of Thor's band of people that became like Zachary Levi.
Right.
I think,
and then it was the guy from Once Upon a Time. Crap.
Yeah. And then technically even like who plays Thanos, like it was originally someone else, but it was kind of a digital, like when it's more of a digital character, or like also Red Skull was replaced by a different actor, but like you can't really tell much of those ones when they're really like, a lot of facial prosthetics or CGI or whatever. It's kind of easier to have them look more similar.
Danny Houston played a villain in Marvel, and then he played a villain in DC. And they were like, oh my gosh, does this mean that they're going to connect it? And then finally the studios are like, no, he's just really good at playing villains. Do you guys remember this?
Yeah. I don't remember that one specifically.
But because Danny Houston was a villain in Wonder Woman. And so, I think he's might not be Red Skull, but he was like a villain in one of the MC. I can't keep up, but that always made me laugh. And they're like, no, he's not connected. It's not saying anything. It's not an Easter egg. He literally is just really good at playing villains.
Well, I mean, we can maybe talk about how I think they just announced that Robert Downey is going to be Dr. Doom, and I'm like, but he's Iron Man. Why are you doing that?
But still don't quite understand what that means,
controversy.
But cool.
But then there's other controversy as well, where like Kang the Conqueror has been played by Jonathan Majors, but because of some scandal and whatnot, they are going to have to recast him, and so they just still don't know who's going to be the next one. Yeah. But he's a really integral character to what happens moving forward. So.
I guess the question is, though, whether or not an audience will accept the recasting. And you take, for example, we have Bond, James Bond, and we're always getting a new Bond. And actually,
but to me, that's not a recasting.
They turn it into an event, and they have somebody new.
To me, I don't.
You don't see it as a recasting.
Okay. No, because in the case of Bond, that's like. And it's the same thing with like the Doctor Who doctors and Bond and stuff like that, where it's kind of the franchise continues, but it's known that somebody new will take the mantle at a certain point. So to me, that doesn't feel like it's a recasting. It feels like the next chapter that's known about. The recastings that are the most jarring are the ones where, you know, it happens in the middle of, you know, a continuation of a story where everybody else is the same character too. And it's just meant to be like, pretend you don't notice that. So like
Eric
else.
Bana being the Hulk is a different thing than Edward Norton to Mark Ruffalo.
Yeah, that's in a different, a different like retelling of it or something. It's not technically in that universe. That's where it starts getting tricky too. With how there's, and then like the Spider-Man as well.
That one was clever, is like how they brought them all together.
Yeah, that was interesting that they were able to bring that back, because it was, I mean, it all has to do with like the ownership of the intellectual property too. And so it's like they had to keep making Spider-Man movies with a certain number of times or something to keep ownership of it. And that's why you had like a different trio of films, and then a new actor and a whole other trio of films, and then I just love that they were able to bring them all together for the most recent Spider-Man, No Way Home, I believe.
I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, if you haven't seen it,
saw it,
you deserve to have it spoiled. But yes, they were all the Spider-Men were together. It was amazing.
But it also reminded me of of accepting a new actor playing the same character, going to DC. It was the Rachel character for the Chris Nolan's Batman, because you had Katie Holmes to Maggie Gyllenhaal.
Yeah, I remember that. And some people like the recasting, and some people hate the recasting, and you have all that flag. But it's interesting when it's done for like a political or like a contracty, some sort of drama reason, versus when someone needs to be recast because of like illness or death. So that happens quite a lot too in different series. Like Dumbledore had to change, and there's ones that happen throughout time.
Rules for dating my daughter when John Ritter.
Right. And they couldn't replace the dad,
passed away.
So they made it that
right. They added some other characters, but it didn't take off after that. It was canceled after that season.
It's so unfortunate, and sometimes it gets folded into the plot. Like I know, I think they folded in like in Glee.
Corey
got into an accident, and I'm not sure. Did they? I'm pretty sure they also put Paul Walker's death into the Fast and the Furious franchise. They just he's like not there anymore.
He's still
but did they say that he died
in the universe?
Oh, really?
You just never show him.
Interesting. Okay. But yeah, sometimes they are able to bring people back.
And they're going to space or something. I don't know.
I think they're past 10.
They
right?
just finished 10.
You're probably right.
And they
because it was like Fast X or something.
Paul is still around in that universe.
Well, I guess he lives on. He lives on as part of their family, because it's all about family.
Oh yeah, as Vince will tell you. But then it's like those clever ways of trying to figure it out, because does it make sense? Like that you can't kill off Dumbledore after the first film, so they'll just recast. Right.
Yeah. And it's interesting because sometimes they try to have him look as close to the other character. I know there was in like Game of Thrones, some side characters that got replaced. And
that was on my list.
know,
Dario Naharis.
And
yeah.
Bridgerton did that as well.
And the
mountain has changed.
Bridgerton did that. They had, I think, was one of the daughters in the Bridgerton family, one of the third daughter who just came out in this season. She was played by a different actress in the first.
And that's
season.
interesting. Is that totally just? I mean, is that not just because of the aging up?
That
because
was
sometimes things get recast. Oh, okay,
right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I guess the original actress would have still been an okay age
if we're
to play
going
her
with
older.
Shows, I wanted to point out one of the more, and it has come out and publicly, and they've spoken about it, of why they changed the actor and how they did that wrong and handled it wrongly, is The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air with Aunt Vivian Banks. Right, the first 3 seasons was played by one actress, and then they replaced her because the producers, including Will Smith, were finding, and I don't have her name. I apologize.
I have the name. It was Janet Hubert originally played Aunt Viv, and then she was replaced by Daphne Maxwell Reid.
Yeah, but the actress they considered difficult, and that was not fair. And in the reunion, he was saying, I was wrong, and that was not fair, and it was just, I shouldn't have done that. And then the 2 actors who played Aunt Vivian reunited, like met for the first time, and they didn't hold grudges against each other, which was really nice. But it was an interesting thing because I noticed it. And then you were wondering why, and then they kind of hushed it. And Janet was really vocal about it, and it really did hurt her career. And then more recently, they owned up to that mistake. And kind of, and it was there's a reunion, I think, on Max and stuff. So that was an interesting thing when you hear about these recastings.
Yeah, and there was the big Becky Connor recast in Roseanne. That's another one where it was like a bunch of seasons. It's crazy when it's more than just one season. You know, sometimes it's more frequent to have someone in the first season and then all of the rest is somebody else. But to have, I think it was seasons 1 to 5. Lacey Goranson left the show to go to college.
That's
apparently,
another...
I'm reading here from one source, and then Sarah Chalk replaced her for 6 and 7. For season 6 and 7.
So, Bewitched. Remember Bewitched?
Right. There was Darren York and Darren Sargent.
Well, that's a famous one, and I never liked the new Darren. And I don't know.
And that's the thing. That's the whole thing. Everybody knows if you're like the new Darren, everybody knows. Well, another controversial one that most people already don't like, and it hasn't even debuted yet, is The Witcher. Henry Cavill being replaced by Liam Hemsworth in The Witcher. And
that's getting a lot of press.
I'm a huge fan of original Geralt as Henry Cavill was absolutely perfect for that. I know the game, and it was just like perfectly cast. He was so great at it, and there's still like not really known.
Are you serious?
Why
I know
exactly.
why.
There's all this controversy. Well, there's all this potential controversy,
so why
but like, is it ever like
Tara,
verified?
Spill the tea, Tara.
Because you have, they have to be sort of diplomatic about it, but then you also have the internet sleuths, right? And
are you believing everything you read on the internet?
Depending on the sources and stuff like that. So it's sort of like how Deadpool finally got made, and no one admits who actually leaked it, and you're like, it was Ryan, and it was the director. We know it was. They just can never.
He said he assisted in the leak a little bit. I
believe that he was in the room, and he's like, you should do it. And he's like, I can't do it, but so that he can have plausible deniability. I believe that.
But anyway, what are they officially saying as to why Henry? Because I've heard rumors, but I don't know.
But the showrunner is a female, and a lot of the head writers, I believe, are female, and all sorts of stuff. But Henry Cavill is a huge gamer and loved the video games, and I do think he's really great, and I do think he's a really good actor. But he got too big of an ego, and he wasn't listening.
I don't know. I've heard a lot of different stories too. I mean, I heard that it was just being really, really precise and difficult about getting it exactly right is kind of what I heard. Not necessarily that it was like an ego thing, but that
ultimately a showrunner decides. And
right. I think it was that he was trying to keep it closer to the original material.
And a showrunner has to deal with Netflix and all sorts of stuff. Like an actor can only do so much. I don't think Henry Cavill has more titles than the lead actor. Like I don't think he's a showrunner, a executive producer or anything. So to be fair, like the showrunner has a lot going on. So she was trying to get this done. And then he kind of within the cast, they were saying, you know, it was just a little bit too much. Like, I know what more than you do. And just like, well, not really. At least be a little bit more respectful.
Well, or you might know about the story, but like,
and it was just not a lot of respect.
You know, television
and
adaptation.
then it was just getting more and more difficult in a hostile working environment. And then they're like, if there's anyone to replace, it's going to be more the actor than a showrunner. So quit being difficult. And he wasn't. And so then they acted on it. And so I was like, all right, I kind of believe it.
I've mixed feelings on how much of that I believe, but just
I know I don't want it to be true.
Assume,
but I also love the women on that show.
Like,
they're so good. They're so good. Everyone is great on the show.
It's a good show, but I feel like there's going to be perhaps a little spike of curiosity of people seeing how Liam.
I feel so bad for Liam. It's a no win-win.
I know. I feel so bad. It's like immediately like, how do you
over
step
his
into
shoulder
those shoes?
and you look at all the comments like he sucks, and I'm like, the poor guy just looks over his shoulder.
Yeah, he's gonna try, but I don't know. We'll see. I mean, there's also, you know, everyone has their different opinions on each new Batman or each new Joker or each new Superman or each new whatever, each new Bond. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. But, you know, to change partway through. I know there was also like, I think there was a show called Sparta, I believe a million years ago. I watched a bit and the actor like died of cancer, the lead. And so then they recast and it didn't, oftentimes it doesn't do as well after because people are sort of, like like the magic is long.
They're tied to that particular lead person, right?
Yeah. Well, it's like when the lead is so much harder to change than supporting characters. So there's a lot of times where supporting characters can change and people, for better or worse, just have to accept it and they get used to it and they adjust. But when it's the lead, it usually kills the show.
The Crow finally got remade and it's been how long? 25 years that they've been trying to remake it. And it's Bill Skarsgård with a terrible haircut.
Really?
And
didn't they redo some with Brandon Lee?
So Brandon Lee did it, and of course he unfortunately died in the production. Then they were always trying to remake The Crow, and it was like name an actor who was like tall, dark, and handsome. They were so close with Jason Momoa. It was going to be Jack Houston for a bit. The nephew of Danny Houston and Angelica Houston. He got casted and they were like, oh, that would be cool. And this would be cool and all that. And they were like getting all of this ready and all that. And it always fell apart. 90s, 2000s, 2010s. Now you're in the 2020s. And
well, everyone was saying that it was a cursed production
and
at
then
that point.
They made it, and it's coming out later, probably around the time that we release this episode, but the trailer is out.
Really?
Is with Bill Skarsgård.
I didn't realize that.
One of the younger brothers, maybe the youngest, I don't know, who played Pennywise in It, the remakes, who's very talented, tall, sure, very good-looking guy. Not dark. He's Swedish, for crying out loud. And then they gave him like a weird haircut and people are nervous because The Crow from the 90s with Brandon Lee is like a classic and there's a cult following and people really like it. And there was so much writing on it and the trailer looks terrible. It's really, what is this? And
I mean, sometimes you got to wonder why.
Like, why did you bother
make
it? And then we're like, but why?
Yeah, part of it is
just let the original be the original and stand and stay.
Make it too, but they think about this built-in audience. Like, again, we already have a following. We already have a built-in audience from here, so we're gonna, do this remake or reboot.
Yeah, it is frustrating though. I mean, it's a built-in audience, but you also, chance completely alienating that audience by ruining something that they love by trying to revive it when it just was fine. I mean, there was that little bit of controversy with Deadpool and Wolverine because Logan was such a beautiful end for Wolverine. But it was like they really stuck the landing. But then this there's ways they're gonna work
the first
things.
time
And
Deadpool
yes, this does involve
showed up was with the Wolverine Origins, which was panned.
Yeah,
I'm sure they're going to make fun of that.
Yeah,
I think that's why they brought it back.
Oh, of course, they've already made fun of it in the Deadpool
but
series.
now that
they've
they
already
have Wolverine with
that.
it,
Yeah,
because I that's what I'm wondering. I can't wait for those jokes. But yeah, so it's going to be interesting. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, well, we are running kind of long on time,
I was
so we should probably.
I did want to say,
right, come on, ladies, we need to coalesce because what we're wondering is whether or not anybody is going to be responding back to our remake of our name. So that's what we hope, that we can get comments from people about our name, and we have a new logo that's coming up.
You're seeing the new name and the new look with this episode. So, we are officially MediaMaker Spotlight henceforth, and we hope that it's more obvious and direct. It might not be, the most punny or whatever, or some sort of clever or long name, but it's just, we wanted it to be a little more literal and not kind of get in our way of confusing people. So yeah, I mean, we hope you like it. I know we kind of cut off Tara there. You were going to say something, but we're also running out of time.
And follow at WIF DC on most social media and follow us and let us know what you think. And if you don't like it, tough. I'm not doing this again.
No, but it's basically same great content. We've put out about 80 or so episodes at this point, and we've learned the evolution of this show has been, we've changed our format a little bit. We've changed, we've kind of leveled up who we're talking to. So we're growing and changing, and it's part of the process. It's part of our journey. And, we hope you'll stick with us for this next chapter in our brand new name and fresh new look. And, we hope it doesn't play out like a celebrity getting too much work done or anything. It's just our natural evolution, and we're leveling up, I think. So thank you for listening, and we hope you also learned some interesting, fun facts about some name changes that have gone well. And most of the name changes seem to be for the better, and recasting sometimes has the controversy and is not for the better. But you know what? We didn't recast. It's the same three original hosts from day one, so we're gonna stick with it, and hopefully you guys like the rename.
Thanks for listening to MediaMaker Spotlight from Women in Film and Video. To learn more about WIF, visit F as in Frank, V as in Victor.org. This podcast is created by Sandra Abrams, Candice Bloch, Brandon Ferry, Tara Jabbari, and Jerry Reinhardt, and edited by Michelle Kim and Inez Perez, with audio production and mix by Steve Lack Audio. Subscribe to continue learning from more amazing media makers. Please visit MediaMakerSpotlight.com for more information.